April 14th, 1846. James and Margaret Reed are packing up for a long trip west. With them, they're bringing their 4 kids, 7 employees, and 3 wagons. Trying to escape financial troubles, Reed hopes to find success in the new frontier of California. And he's not the only one. Even before the gold rush of '49, thousands of Americans had tried their luck by going to California and Oregon and look for cheap land. Luckily for Reed, a new route to California had just been discovered. Called the Hastings Cutoff, it would shave nearly 300 miles off their journey. The route stated that instead of going to Fort Hall and then over the Great Salt Lakes, the immigrants should go to Fort Bridger, cross through the Great Salt Desert, and loop around the Ruby Mountains, then rejoining the California Trail. Before leaving, Reed joins up with the older George and Jacob Donner, looking to start a new business in California. They are bringing with them their families, including 8 children, 6 teamsters, and 6 wagons. Their first stop is Independence, Missouri. It takes about a month, and it goes off without a hitch, reaching the town on May 10th. Independence was a major hub for pioneers heading west. There, they would gather up supplies and find guides. And there, the party decided to join a large group of migrants heading to Fort Laramie, led by Captain Russell. The party, including the Donners, left Independence on May 12th. Their next stop was Fort Laramie. On the way there, they had to cross over the Big Blue River. Now, this river was difficult for pioneers to cross over. The Donners built a raft to traverse it, and that took about 5 days to do, because they had to do it one at a time. Afterwards, the party decided to camp out the rest of the day, during which Sarah Keyes, Margaret Reed's mother, died of tuberculosis. She is buried, and on May 31st, they leave for Fort Laramie. Arriving on June 27th, the party rests at the fort for a week. While there, James Reed meets an old friend, James Clyman, who had just traveled the Hastings Cutoff with Hastings himself. After catching up, Reed told Clymans of the route. Clyman warned Reed that the cutoff was rocky and couldn't be traveled by wagons. Reed disagreed. Reed had a high opinion of himself, seeing himself as a mountain man who could surpass any odds facing the party. And as the party was already falling behind the other pioneers, Reed thought it worth the risk. On July 5th, the party left Fort Laramie. Russells and the majority of the party left for Fort Hall, while Donners and the rest left for Fort Bridger. And on July 27th, the party reached the trading outpost, Fort Bridger. Expecting to meet Hastings there, they were surprised to find the fort nearly empty, except for the mountain man, Jim Bridger. Bridger gave Reed a note from Hastings which told Reed to follow the route and meet him there. Reed and Donner asked Bridger what he thought. Bridger told them that the route was clear and was full of grass and water. At this point, the party was still healthy, with 44 adults, 43 children, and roughly 23 wagons. The route was going to be difficult, but the party believed Hastings could lead them through it. But when they reached the entrance on August 6, they found a note from Hastings on a tree, which stated that the route was impassable, and told them to follow his wagon trucks and to meet up with him. Reed did, and once he found Hastings, Hastings told him of a new route, which essentially went over the Wasatch Mountain range. This trail, however, wasn't good either, possibly even worse. It was overgrown and rocky, and the party's progress was slowed as they had to keep on stopping to move trees or to remove boulders out of the way. It took 23 days just to cross this portion. On August 30th, the party had to cross the biggest hurdle of their journey. They had to cross the Great Salt Desert, which in their mind was 40 miles long and took 5 days to do. However, in reality, it was 80 miles long. As the party began to cross, they quickly started to run out of water, and soon oxen began dying, and with that many wagons had to be left behind. Ultimately, it took the party nearly 8 days to finish their journey. While no one had died, the party lost 4 wagons, and on September 26, the party reached the Standard Trail. This cutoff, which was supposed to cut off 2 weeks from the party's time, instead cost them 18 extra days. People were angry with Hastings and Reed for convincing them to take the route. People began to talk behind his back. This frustration came to a head on October 5th. That day, a wagon led by Male Elliott, Reed's teamster, was hit by the wagon of John Snyder. This led to a fight, with Snyder hitting Elliott with a whip handle. Reed tried to intervene but was hit in the head by Snyder. He tried to strike again, however Reed stabbed Snyder in the chest. He died shortly afterwards. Murder had just been committed, and so the question became what to do with Reed. There was no official justice system for wagon trains, so it was up to the members to decide his fate. Some, like Kersenberg, wanted to see Reed hang. However, Margaret begged for his life, so it was decided that he would be banished from the party. He was forced to travel to Fort Sutter alone, except with his teamster Walter Heron. Abandoned, and with no gun or food, they would surely starve. However, Virginia Reed snuck out of camp and brought Reed his gun, so he could protect himself. She then went back to the party, hopefully to see her father again one day. Back on the trail, everyone was up and walking, to decrease the weight in the wagons. However, not everyone could walk that long. The 60-year-old Belgian immigrant named Mr. Hardcoop begged to be let back into Kersenberg's wagon. However, he was denied. Unable to keep up, he stayed back hopefully so another wagon could pick him up. He was last seen on the side of the road. Unfortunately for the party, oxen kept dying and more wagons had to be abandoned. One of these wagons was owned by the German immigrant Wolfiner. He stayed behind the cache of his wagon. With him were two immigrants named Reinhardt and Spitzer. Wolfiner was known to be a wealthy immigrant, so as he started to cache his wagon, Reinhardt took out a pistol and shot him twice in the back of the head. The two then took any valuables Wolfiner had. Upon returning to the party, when asked of Wolfiner's disappearance, they stated he had been killed in an Indian attack. Another death for the party. On the bright side, immigrant Charles Stanton rode ahead to Fort Sutter, got some food and two Indian guides to lead them through the Sierra Nevadas, named Salvador and Lewis.
That's too much now!
At this point in the journey, the party had lost 5 of its members and most of its wagons. However, they were on the last leg of their journey. All they had to do was pass through the Sierra Mountains, and then reach Fort Sutter. The immigrants were hopeful that their suffering was almost over. But then, in early November, it began to snow. First a little, and then a lot. The party tried to continue on, but the snow made it impossible to move further. So they decided to camp at Truckee Lake. A majority of the party made it close to Truckee Lake to rest, while the Donners and some other stragglers camped farther back on the trail. The group built hastily made cabins, with mud floors, no doors, and roofs made of hides. Inside, the settlers were quickly running out of food. It was clear that something had to be done. Several attempts were made to hunt for food, but the pioneers were mostly businessmen and didn't really know what they were doing, except for one pioneer named William Eddy, who hunted for sport beforehand. He was able to kill a few deer and even a bear. While it helped, it wasn't nearly enough for 80 people. The party sat in the cabins, hopefully trying to wait out the storm, but they slowly starved. The first death was Reed's teamster Bayless Williams, who died of fever. It was clear that if the party didn't try to find help, they would all starve. So Franklin Graves came up with an idea. He made 13 pairs of snowshoes. The plan was to cross through the Sierra Nevada on foot to try and get help from Fort Sutter. 13 settlers volunteered to make the trek, with Charles Stanton, Lewis, and Salvador leading the way. It was a difficult trek for the pioneers. The snow and heavy winds made movement difficult. It was exhausting, especially when the pioneers had to scale mountains. The first settler to drop was Charles Stanton. He was too exhausted to move, and volunteered to stay behind as he didn't want to slow the group down. As they left, they knew he would soon die. On December 24th, right before Christmas, the pioneers set up camp in the mountains. They had no food, and starvation quickly set in. By the 25th, 4 settlers died of starvation or exposure, Antonio being the first, followed by Frank Graves, Patrick Dolan, and Lemuel Murphy. With no food and 4 dead men, There was only one terrible solution. The group begrudgingly ate the other members, Antonio being the first. However, not everyone ate. Eddie, Louis, and Salvador refused to eat the other people. After their meal, the party had enough energy to continue moving. Back at the cabins, the pioneers had begun to chew on bark and oxides for substance. At this point, 3 cabin members had also died. So, to survive, they made the same terrible decision. Back on the truck, the pioneers were still suffering from starvation. When Jay Fosdick died of exhaustion, he was eaten almost immediately after death. However, the pioneers were soon hungry again. The settlers talked quietly of killing and eating Louis and Salvador. Eddie overheard this and warned them. Soon after, they both quietly broke off and tried to reach Sutter alone. However, the two didn't last long alone. They were almost immediately found by Eddie and William Foster, frostbitten and near death. Foster took out his gun. Eddie tried to stop him, but Foster pushed him back and shot both dead. They were then eaten by the group. On January 17th, the group reached an Indian village, and with their help, got to Fort Sutter. Most of the members of the Forlorn Hope died, but they had succeeded. Now the trapped settlers had to be rescued. When they actually reached Fort Sutter, the group was surprised to find James Reed and Walter Harrod alive and well. They had reached the fort in late October and had tried multiple times to organize a rescue mission, but they were halted by the war in Mexico. Reed immediately asked about his family. Luckily, they were all alive, but they were still starving and needed rescue. A relief party was formed of 7 members, including Eddie, while Reed stayed behind to form a second relief party. In early February, the group set off. Along the way, they created 2 resupply depots, so the survivors could eat on the way back. The party reached the camp on February 18th, although they were initially surprised as the camp was completely buried. They weren't sure where the cabins were until Mrs. Murphy dug her way out of the snow, and she greeted them saying, "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?" Once inside, the party noticed a shocking situation. 13 settlers had died, and their bodies were being eaten by everyone, including the children. They gave out as much food as they could, then left with 21 of the 43 survivors, promising that another rescue party would be coming soon. The trip back wasn't easy, especially when animals raided one of the resupply depots. Ultimately, the party lost 3 members on its way back to Fort Sutter, and when they reached Fort Sutter, James Reed was finally reunited with his family. However, there were still 22 survivors in need of rescue. This second relief was formed with Reed at the head. This party reached the Donner Camp in early March. The party decided to take 17 of the 22 survivors, mostly children, from the Graves and Breen family. As the party left, it initially went well. However, when in the middle of their trip, they were hit by a blizzard. Tragically, a 5-year-old named Isaac Donner froze to death, and the group was forced to stop. This camp would later be known as the Starve Camp. The rescuers wanted to continue, but both the Grave and Breen families refused to leave, wanting to rest and worrying that they would freeze in the blizzard. So, 3 rescuers volunteered to stay with the group, while 3 survivors and the rest of the rescuers left for Fort Sutter. At the camp, the rescuers and Mother Margaret Breen tried to keep everyone alive. However, soon Elizabeth Graves and her 5-year-old son both died. The rescuers decided they had to leave. Seeing no way to bring everyone down, 2 of the rescuers each picked up one of the healthiest kids. The third rescuer, a man named John Stark, refused to leave anyone in the mountain. Stark took all 9 children down, picking 2 up, moving them down the mountain, then going back for more. It was a long process, but all 13 survivors survived. One of the survivors, Peggy Breen, when asked who had saved them, she said, "Nobody but God and Stark and the Virgin Mary." But there were still settlers in need of saving. Eddie and Foster set out to save them. Eddie went believing his wife and kids were still alive. When they reached the camp, they realized there were only 9 settlers left. When Eddie inquired about his son, Kersenberg was forced to admit that he had ate him. Foster nearly fought Kersenberg, but instead said, "If I see you in California, I will kill you." Unfortunately, George Donner and Livia Murphy were sick and couldn't make the trip. Tasman Donner wanted to stay with George, and Kersenberg refused to leave. So, the party took the 5 kids, with another rescue party promised. The trip was easier, as some of the snow had thawed, and everyone survived the journey. There were multiple attempts to make another rescue party, but they were stopped by manpower shortages. It wouldn't be until April, a month later, until a party was able to make it through. When they arrived, the rescuers were shocked to see only Kersenberg alive. He was surrounded by George Donner's pistols and the half-eaten bodies of those who stayed with him. They threatened to lynch him, but instead decided it was best to just bring him down. Nearly half the migrants on the Donner Party died of exposure, frostbite, exhaustion, murder, or disease. Only the Reed and Breen families escaped unscathed. The Donner family was all but destroyed, with all 4 adults and 3 kids dead, the rest being orphaned. Multiple survivors like William Eddy or Kersenberg lost their entire families, and for the survivors, the horrors they faced would forever stay with them. The Donner Party remains an iconic event in American history. It's mostly remembered today for cannibalism, but it should also be remembered for the courage of the pioneers who continued on in face of all the adversity they faced, and for the bravery of the rescuers who risked death to save a group of strangers.